Happy Friday, everybody. I am Bill Christen. I am the education manager for Gold Coast Schools. So happy Friday. On behalf of Gold Coast Schools, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar. We're going to go over the NAR proposed settlement in reference to the lawsuit that has been going on. So I'm going to give everybody a chance to get online. It's just 12 o'clock, and we have a lot of people that we're expecting, so we're going to give everybody a chance to get on. So anyway, thanks again on behalf of Gold Coast. We've got over 50 years of experience educating Florida real estate professionals. So we've probably got some of our former students, maybe some current students online, and maybe some students or people that might be wanting to get the real estate license. So welcome to everybody. And I'm just looking at our boxes here, and we're getting more people online. So fantastic. So we're going to talk about this lawsuit and maybe try to clear up some things. Again, this is a proposed settlement. And if you have been following social media, the news media, and other outlets, there's been a lot of misinformation thrown out there. Media, social media, there's just been a lot of speculation and conjecture and innuendo about the ramifications of this lawsuit. So first and foremost, just remember this is all speculative, even with what is really going to transpire, because it is a proposed settlement. The Department of Justice, or the DOJ, is they still have to sign off and agree to everything. It looks like they probably will, and that's what we're kind of hoping for. And so the information that I'm going to be going through today is information that's been given out by the National Association of Realtors. So we're going to go over some of the frequently asked questions that they've been getting through Florida Realtors and NAR as well. So I'm going to keep this specific to Florida real estate law, and so this is particularly for Florida. So just so you know, they're not going to be changing the law. This really doesn't have anything with law changes as much as the representation on this is for realtors. So not every real estate licensee is a realtor. And so that's something to consider. So this lawsuit really has to do with realtors and MLS participants. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go. So what a lot of people are really concerned about is compensation for agents that represent buyers, and we're going to address some of that stuff. And again, these things that we're going to talk about are questions that people have been asking, and a lot of things that are on people's minds that are in the real estate profession and even getting into the real estate profession. And we're going to try to put a little bit of clarity to some of this stuff. One thing to remember too is that what the lawsuit was about is commissions, and the whole premise was that there was a conspiracy and collusion between real estate agents and consumers. And realistically, that's really not. I really am surprised that it went as far as it did. And unfortunately, I think a lot of it is just communication that people really didn't know. We've got antitrust laws and everything in place, and the realtors, National Association of Realtors, everything that has been done through the realtors has been for the protection of the consumer. Got a question in the box, and I'm going to answer some questions, and got a question about commercial real estate. That's a great question, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Realistically, it's going to be anybody that puts anything in the MLS, and you can put commercial property in the MLS. So there's two main things that is going on with this. First, we for years have put cooperating compensation. So if you have a listing, you put in the MLS, and in the listing agreement, it's outlined that you have an agreement with the seller that you're going to offer out a cooperating commission for a broker bringing a buyer. And so what has transpired with this is that one of the main things of this the settlement is that you cannot put any compensation, cooperating compensation, or anything to do with compensation in the MLS. And again, that's been something that we've done for a long, long time. That being said, and this is maybe to help answer that question about the commercial side of it, if you don't use the MLS, you don't have to worry about it. And so we're going to talk about that. And there's been a lot of speculation and conjecture about who's this affect? What does it affect? I'm gonna say one thing is don't panic. I think that's one of the things that I've seen a lot of, and I've been around. I've lectured at small brokerages and bigger brokerages about this topic. And one thing that I always suggest is don't panic. And I've been in the real estate business for 50 years myself, and the important thing to remember is there's always change in this industry. There's always some major changes that pop up. This is a good one. This is a pretty big one, and realistically, it's going to be about adjustment and everything. This proposed settlement has nothing to do with that you'll, as a buyer's agent, that you'll never be compensated. That's just not true. It's just the way that you're going to be compensated, the way that you have to negotiate, and so forth. We have a question about recording and the slides sent later. There's a good possibility of that, and we'll check on that. This is being recorded, so we'll see if we can get this out, possibly on our website at some point. But again, the big thing is don't panic. It's going to be an adjustment, and that's why we're here, and that's why Gold Coast. That's why we're trying to kind of help keep everybody on track with this. But big thing is we don't want you to panic. The law is not changing. So in Florida we have Chapter 475, really, that oversees the real estate law, and Florida Administrative Code 61J2. Those are not going to change right now. There's no indication that that needs to change or anything else. This has all to do with realtors. And as I mentioned, you don't have to be a realtor to have a real estate license and an active license. This probably will not affect business brokerage because they don't use the same MLS system that realtors use. So this really has all to do with realtors. So if you're a commercial real estate agent, you don't submit listings into the MLS, you shouldn't worry too much. This primarily has to do with a lot of residential and anything that goes in the MLS. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about. The other part that I'd like to bring up is, and in this, I'm going to address brokers in this respect, is that it looks like brokerages really are going to have to do a lot more training with this. I would suggest looking at your office policies and going over negotiation and tactics with negotiation, because that is going to play a part in the changes with this. Is negotiation on commission is going to change. So again, that would be for brokerages. And as a sales associate or a broker associate, you're working for a broker, make sure that you're engaged with your broker and that you're staying up to date on what the brokerage policies are, because that is going to be very important moving forward. So we're going to get into the slides, and what I've done is there's been a number of questions in the through Florida Realtors and other stuff. I've got another question about rents and pre-construction, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Now, pre-construction is interesting. Now, if you're in real estate, you know that there's new home builders, there's developers that sell new construction, and some of them use the MLS. And folks, again, this has to do with the stuff that goes into the MLS. So a lot of times, if you're working with a builder, there's an agreement it's off MLS. Sometimes with builders that you don't have to worry about that. You're going to get compensated. So these are really good questions. All right, and we are getting hit with a lot of questions, but I'm going to start the slide presentation so we can look at that. All right. So the NAR proposed settlement. One of the big questions and concerns and fears and everything else is I represent buyers. Am I still going to get compensated? And the answer to that, yeah, you certainly will. It's just going to be a little bit different. As I mentioned, for years, the commission, the cooperating commission, was outlined in the MLS. So if you saw a property in the MLS and you were going to show it to a buyer, it was in there of what the cooperating compensation would be, whatever the percentage would be, or a flat fee. And so we're gonna talk a little bit about that. So there's some options. How can a buyer's broker be paid? Number one, the seller may agree to pay the buyer's broker. That's what we've really been doing for forever. The listing broker or brokerage may agree to pay a portion of their compensation to the buyer's broker. And again, typically the listing contract outlines a certain percentage. And by the way, this is something very important to remember as well. There is no, and has never been any set commission. And that's been thrown around in the media crazy. The 6%, and it's been that there's a set commission, and there's no such thing. And so that's been part of the law for a very long time. Commission has been and always will be negotiable. And so it's just going to be negotiated in a different fashion. So again, that's why I say don't panic, because it's just going to be an adjustment on how do we get compensated if we're representing a buyer. So the listing brokerage can agree to pay a portion of their commission to the buyer. The seller may pay buyer concessions used by buyer towards the buyer's closing costs. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on as well. And then finally, the buyer may pay the buyer's broker. And again, this has been an option forever. And so before I go any further, I also want to encourage everybody, because one of the things that's going to change is that in Florida, we're going to have to start as a realtor. Again, this is as a realtor. If you're working as a realtor and selling houses, that you're going to have to use a buyer brokerage agreement. And some folks have been using them consistently for years, and that's a good thing. I've always believed in them, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But realistically, the buyer brokerage agreement will be an important tool moving forward, because that's going to, and the other part to remember with that is some states, a lot of states actually already require that a buyer's agent use a buyer agreement. And so that's going to be a consistent thing. Some states you have to actually have the buyer brokerage agreement signed and filled out and ready to go when you submit an offer. So that's going to be one of the changes that is going to come into play with the negotiation part, because we are going to have to get used to informing a buyer on the use of the buyer brokerage agreement. Some people are not comfortable with that yet, but I think over time, the buyer brokerage agreement and the negotiation and how to utilize that will become a lot easier. But again, it's something new, which a lot of the times anything new can be frightening. So these are things that we're going to work on going forward in our real estate careers. The next one is, how can realtors and MLS participants still make offers of compensation? So how can you make some offers of compensation? Well, listing brokers can make offers of compensation by complying with these two things. Number one, the broker cannot put any offer of compensation in the MLS at all. So just remember that's going to be the big change. And back in, in March, the MLS, I'm in Central Florida, and the MLS that we use up here is Stellar. And all the MLSs have taken out that there has to be at least $1. And as it is now, there's zero that you can put in there as offering a cooperating compensation. Also, they have to conspicuously disclose to the seller in writing in advance that your listing broker or seller are paying another broker, or they're offering pay compensation to another broker acting for the buyer, including the amount or rate of such payment, and obtain consent to this offer of payment compensation. And again, that's pretty much been one of the things that we've used in listing agreements to begin with. Also, what is going to be really important with this is that the Florida realtors, and I really want to make this clear, the Florida realtors they're working on changing forms, and I look for the buyer brokerage agreement's probably going to change. They are working on a form that's going to be compensation form between brokerages, which I think is really going to help fix some of this. So that's what they're looking at, is actually having a commission agreement, if you will, between a buyer's agent and the listing agent. So, or listing brokerage and selling brokerage. So that would help. That's gonna help out a lot. So just keep that in mind, that Florida realtors are very aware that they are going to have to update a lot of their forms. So that should help us out a lot too. Will there be another way for brokers to share compensation other than the MLS? Are in the MLS? No, the proposed settlement prohibits this. And again, two big changes with this, and without sounding, too redundant, the big two changes are that you can't put any kind of cooperating compensation in the MLS, which we've established, and you're going to have to use buyer brokerage agreements. That's the two big things. Released parties. Now, what they did is, with these lawsuits, there was a lot of copycat lawsuits that were getting started, and that's really why NAR settled this too, and didn't continue fighting. It probably would have just gotten worse with things, and I think they saw the writing on the wall with that, and that's why this proposed settlement has come around. So release parties, which is most realtor members. So if you're a realtor, chances are you are in good shape, that we've been released from any liability with this, as long as we adhere to certain changes that are going to be in the MLS. Cannot create, facilitate, or support any non-MLS mechanism for MLS offers of compensation. So what that means is anything that has to do with the MLS, we can't put any type of compensation in there. I've seen some memes and some other things out there that people are, trying to put 2% or 4% or whatever. So you have to be very careful with that. There's nothing that we can do to try to sneak the commission into the MLS. It also prohibits the MLS providing listing information to an aggregator for listing brokers to offer comp by buyers brokers. That's going to be your Zillows and everything that the IDEXs that the MLS listings go to, all the online sites that have listings and such. There won't be any way to put your compensation in there. A proposed settlement specifically provides that release parties must not create, facilitate, or support any non-MLS for listings. Sellers offer compensation to buyer, broker, or other representatives. Again, that's the same thing I was just talking about. Offers are eliminated in the MLS. So now what? And this is a good question. So how are we going to tell a buyer's broker, that this is what the offer of compensation is? And by the way, I'm really hoping, very hopeful, that listing agents and listing brokers will be very, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, actually, but I think educating sellers on this is going to be extremely important. That as we move forward, that if you're a listing agent, that you are very transparent and open, and explain this to your sellers, as we're going to talk about in a slide coming up. There's no limitation on where a listing broker or seller can offer compensation off the MLS. MLSs can't create any non-MLS mechanism for sellers to offer compensation by a broker. Proposed settlement states that you can't put you can put compensation on your website. So that's something to think about as well. So if you have a brokerage and you have a website, you can actually put the cooperating compensation in and on your website. You can put it on social media. How about that? That's probably something that's we've never really thought about. In an agreement between a broker and the selling broker, or any other form of advertising. So any other form of advertising, that's pretty broad. So I think that the more this unfolds, the more things will make sense. Okay, so just things that we haven't done putting cooperating compensation on your website. That's probably going to end up happening on social media. If you have a listing, as long as it doesn't link to the MLS and doesn't have anything, it's not from the MLS or any of the aggregators that that use the MLS, you could put the compensation on there. Can the offer of compensation be verbal? So let's say you're a buyer's agent and you call a listing agent, and you're talking to the listing agent and you ask them, well, is there compensation? Is there cooperating compensation? And the broker says, and the listing agent says, yes, it's whatever it is, $10,000. That's a flat fee, or 5,000, or 3%, or 4%, or 2%, or whatever it would be. It could be verbal, but it's highly recommended that you get that in an email, because we know how things go, right? And it's always good. Document, 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 and disclose, disclose, disclose in our business. All right, where else can offers of compensation be made? Again, the offers can be narrow or they can be broad. They can still be a blanket, unconditional, unilateral offer for current listings. So for your current listings, that is, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. And here's the thing to remember too. This is all, and this is in the slides, but this is all due to start in sometime in July, mid-July. So just be aware that if you have current listings right now, it could affect some stuff. And I've got a slide that we'll talk just a little bit about that. So it can be buyer specific. It can be property specific. It can be specific to buyers brokers who will establish a certain brokerage agency relationship. And we're going to talk a little bit about agency relationship in this as well as we go forward. Florida Realtors is currently working on a co-broker compensation agreement that does not currently exist. So with that, and that's what I think is going to be one of the most important documents that Florida Realtors can come out with, is some type of document, contract or agreement between brokerages for compensation, because it's just going to change the way we do things. Okay, as a listing broker, can I offer compensation to buyers broker when they call to show a listing? And I addressed that just a few minutes ago. The offer can be verbal, but again, it's recommended to get it in writing. An email that confirms the content of the call and outlines the type of compensation agreement may be sufficient. And again, folks, if you're in real estate, you know how important it is for all the documentation and everything to be enforceable. So you want to make sure you get everything in writing. Ideally, you would want some evidence of the verbal agreement. Now, currently there is no form, but it is being worked on. What about current listings? And again, I mentioned this. Should the current listing agreement be amended? And that depends. When does your listing expire? Well, if you have a current listing, if you've got a 6-month or longer listing, it could be impacted. Florida Realtor listing agreements were updated on March 19th to reflect the current NAR policy that $0 is sufficient offer of compensation in the MLS. And if you're a practicing real estate professional, I'm sure you were notified, you got all the emails and the updates and everything from the MLS that you use, and were notified of that. Review your current listings, real important. I'm going to take a second here and I'm going to look at some of the questions that are in the box, see if I can get to some of them. And again, some of these I'm going to probably address through the presentation anyway. If I have to be a real estate agent, not a realtor, then do I need to have a buyer broker agreement signed? And I can sell pre-construction. Yes, I think I answered some of that. Is a transaction broker disclosure going away? That's one of the questions in the Q&A box. And we'll talk a little bit about agency here in just a minute, but there is no transaction broker disclosure. In the state of Florida, it is the presumed relationship that we have that we are acting as transaction brokers. So there's no written disclosure or any kind of disclosure as a transaction broker. We're going to talk a little bit about that as we go forward. And then we have a question: how does a real estate agent operate without being part of the MLS, find listings and and such. I'm saying that you are saying MLS and NAR members must use an exclusive buyer broker agreement, and others do not have to have this agreement signed. Okay, good question. And with that, again, it's specific. If you are a realtor, you are going to have to use a buyer brokerage agreement. If the listings and if you are a member of a brokerage that is a realtor-based brokerage, and you will have to adhere to these things. You can't put compensation in the MLS, and you have to use the buyer brokerage agreement. However, there are people that sell real estate that are not members of the Florida Realtors, their local board of realtors, Florida Realtors, or National Association of Realtors. If they sell businesses, and a lot of people that sell, you could sell new construction and some other stuff where you don't have to be a realtor to be a licensee. So how does a real estate agent operate? I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through the slide presentation, and then I'm going to come back to the Q&A, and I'll stay on a little bit longer after we get done with this, and maybe I can answer some of these questions by this presentation. All right. So what about current listings? Review those listings. Now, new disclosure language is going to be required. Do I have to amend my existing listings in July to add this disclosure? Yes, this disclosure is required by the proposed settlement. And again, it's proposed. Broker commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. Folks, that's always been the law. That's always been the rule. And commissions have always been negotiable. But in this case, because of this lawsuit, there has to be conspicuous wording and disclosure that states that broker commissions are not set by law and they're fully negotiable. Florida Realtors, they're not sure whether listings executed prior to this need to be amended or to add this. This is a settlement requirement on the realtors and MLS participants. All right, when will these offers of compensation changes impact us? The deadline for these changes related to the offer of compensation is July of this year, whether or not the settlement proposal is finished. It may be earlier than mid-July, but it can't be later. And again, folks, if you're following this, I would follow it probably through the National Association of Realtors website and their information. I will tell you that the mainstream media, social media, is getting it wrong. And so don't trust everything that you read on different social media platforms. So I would go directly to the source of National Association of Realtors website. Maybe earlier than mid-July, but it can be later. Check to see when your MLS completes its rule changes, and again, with your brokerage, when your brokerage is going to implement changes. And I'm encouraging any brokers that are out there, to start really being proactive, and please reach out to us at Gold Coast if you need some help with anything that we can help you with education as far as going over certain things. Let us know, and we'd be glad to discuss things with you, anything that we see or any changes that we see that may help you out. So we're always here to help any real estate professional. Does a realtor or MLS participant have to provide the seller with written disclosure as part of the settlement? Well, the settlement requires conspicuous disclosure to the seller in writing. A listing broker or seller is paying another broker, offering to pay another for acting for the buyer, including the amount of any payment, obtaining consent to offer the payment. Florida Realtors are working on the listings for residential property. Okay, so again, folks, this is the Florida Realtors is working on changing these forms, and this doesn't happen overnight. A lot of it has to go to the Florida Bar. They have to get things approved and looked at. There is a huge process, but they are working on these things. One of the things that the update will include, and the last bullet point there, is that it will include broker commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. So I think that's pretty clear, and if you're listening to the media, that's been one of the biggest things of misinformation that's been thrown out there. All right. Does the settlement require MLS participants to use a buyer-broker agreement when working with a buyer? By mid-July, there will be new MLS rules put in place that require realtors and MLS. Now, folks, if you've seen some consistency with this, I want you to notice this. Realtors and MLS participants, because also you don't have to be a realtor to be an MLS participant if you pay a certain amount to the MLS to put a listing in it. So this is why they are using this wording. So if you're a realtor or you put stuff in the MLS, working with buyers, you must enter into a written agreement with the buyer before home tours and must specify and disclose the buyer broker compensation. And again, I'm going to encourage everybody to become extremely familiar with buyer brokerage agreements. That being said, truly believe that there's probably going to be a lot of things that change on those forms, as well as the listing agreements. So, stay as informed as you can with this. And so congratulations in attending this, because this is the stuff that keeps you up to date on what's going on. All right. How will buyer broker compensation be disclosed on the agreement with the buyer? And this is one of those questions too. Where do I put it? How do I put it on there? The agreement's got to include the amount or the rate of compensation that will be received for brokerages, or how the amount will be determined, or will determine the compensation. So this is one of those things too. Something that's important to remember too, it doesn't always have to be a percentage. And we've got a slide that's coming up, and I'll talk about that. It can be a flat fee. And I reiterate, if you're a sales associate or a broker associate, check with your broker, check with what the broker policy is. And the broker policy may change with this. We may be looking at different ways to be compensated. There's been a lot of comfort, if you will, in the percentage of sale price being the preferred method of compensation. But flat fees have always been an option. And again, it's always negotiable. The fees can't exceed the amount from any source. Conspicuous language that states brokers' commissions are not set by law and they're fully negotiable, which we've talked a lot about. There's no requirement that the agreement explain the buyer or buyer's brokerage responsibilities or the form of broker relationship that's formed. And again, in Florida, and this is from everything I am hearing from the state, is that state law is not going to change as far as our agency law goes. And so in Florida, it's presumed that we are acting as transaction brokers at any given time. There's no written disclosure. When you wake up in the morning, and if you're a real estate licensee and you're an active real estate licensee, you are working as a transaction broker unless otherwise deemed a single agent by your brokerage. So that is that's not going to change. They can't state that services are free unless there's no financial compensation to be received from any source. And that's been one of the things too, and I think this slide's coming up because a lot of people have asked, well, geez, does this mean I have to work for free? No, you do not ever have to work for free. I don't think that's I don't think that would be something you'd want to do. So this is not what this means, is that you have to work for free. All right, can you discuss seller concessions to buyers that are permitted to be in the MLS? A seller may offer buyer concessions on a realtor MLS. Again, that really hasn't changed. Concessions cannot be limited or conditioned on payments of the buyer brokerage fee. Can't sneak it in. You can't sneak in seller agrees to offer I don't know, 2% or 7% or $20,000 to an agent, a buyer's agent. Can't put that in there. And so again, what it really boils down to is what can go in the MLS and what can't. So they may be offered to assist with buyer closing costs, though. It's advisable to discuss with the seller at the time you take the listing if the seller is willing to make seller concessions to the buyer. Now, listing agents, that's my preferred when I'm selling real estate. That's what I prefer to do is list. I love listing. Anyway, but these are things that as a listing agent that are going to have to be discussed a little bit differently, maybe a little more with more clarity on the fact that this has changed. We're not offering this in the MLS, so we have to figure out ways to bring buyers and have buyers agents know that they're going to be compensated. So how are we going to do that? This must be community MLS. How? Depends on whether or not the MLS fields are there to do so. And what we're talking about there is concessions. And I believe the MLS that we use up here, Stellar, I believe the concessions box is actually on there. So be very familiar with your MLS. Do I have to work for free if I'm a buyer's broker? No one has to work for free. You are not required to show property where there's no compensation offered by the buyer or the listing or the buyer. So here's something to remember with that as well. You're not required to show properties that offer no compensation. However, you can't skip over the property. Okay, you have to remember that. In these instances, you must point out the properties, okay, where no compensation is offered to the buyer's broker. Should your search turn up properties that meet the buyer's criteria and needs? Don't hide the property. And by the way, and folks, I've been in this game a long time. A bunch of you, I'm sure, have been too. And I've actually had conversations with agents that are agents that really, and I'm trying not to throw anybody under the bus with this, but that have refused to show people properties that were listed on the MLS with compensation the way it's been for a lower percentage or anything like that. And I just think that's wrong. I've always felt that that's wrong and it's unethical. So that's how that goes. But you cannot skip over those. And going back to this, if there's a property and you have no idea if there's going to be any compensation. Number one, you're not going to know by seeing it in the MLS anyway. So you're going to have to show them any properties that fit the buyer's criteria to begin with. So just be aware that this is where the confusion and this is where everybody's starting to kind of get a little bit worried about, well, how am I going to find out how I'm getting paid? Because that's usually what we work for, is to get paid. Can the listing agent advise a seller of ramifications of not offering compensation? And again, this is going to be a huge conversation between a listing agent and a seller. Yes, the listing agent may explain that the offer of compensation helps facilitate the transaction because of the financial advantage to the buyer. There you go. So as a listing agent, that's something that I would definitely be educating my sellers on, is that, hey, if we don't offer out any kind of compensation, and again, folks, this has been going on forever. This is how we've done business for a long time. So that part's not changing. Listing agents may also explain that buyers may face the economic reality of needing to select property where no compensation is being offered to their agents. So again, this is about fair competition and keeping things competitive. The listing agent should not say that buyer brokers will not show the property if there is no offer of compensation. So folks, that's where you have to be very careful. You cannot tell a seller, well, brokers that represent buyers will not show the property if we don't offer compensation. You cannot say that, but you can educate them on some of the ramifications. Okay. And again, this stuff is all brand new, so there's going to be a lot of transition from what we've known to what is new. Okay, but I mentioned this earlier. Don't panic. It's all going to be okay. Does the settlement change the brokerage relationships in Florida? No. Settlement does not reference transaction broker, single agent, or no brokerage relationship. And those are the three brokerage relationships that we could work in Florida. Now I know there's people that are online from different states and such, and this is Florida specific. In Florida, we have three brokerage relationships: the transaction brokerage, and then single agency or no brokerage relationship. So this agreement has nothing to do with the relationships changing. Settlement requirement on a realtor and MLS participant enter an agreement with the buyer they are working with before a buyer tours the home. So that's when you really want to get your buyer brokerage agreement, before they tour the home, before you show them any houses. Changes to forms. Florida Realtors is reviewing, will likely update numerous forms before July. Existing forms that are available are the buyer broker agreement, showing agreement, and the buyer retainer agreement. And that was new last month. I don't know if anybody's used that yet. I looked at it, but again, it's a new form, something to get very familiar with. All right. Okay. That's the end of the slides. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop sharing this, and I'm going to get into some of the Q&A here because we still have some time. All right. So I've got in the chat box, there's some stuff here. Let's see. If I'm representing a buyer, wouldn't I include my compensation on the contract to purchase offer? No. Here's something to remember, and that's a good question, is that on the contract to purchase, so the purchase and sale agreement, the FAR bar purchase and sale agreement, and of course you've got the standard contract and the as-is contract on the offer. That contract is between the buyer and seller, not any agents. So you have to be very careful of not putting your compensation in there. Again, Florida Realtors is extremely aware of the need for different documentation, and so they are working on that. We have a comment in here: business brokers in Florida can join a business MLS called the Business Brokers of Florida. And thank you, Scott, for mentioning that. That is absolutely true. And it's good to see that some business brokers are on. It requires commission sharing. These are all commercial transactions, but would seem to be affected by the NAR decision. When's the next time for this topic webinar? We're going to get another one scheduled, and thank you for asking that, because it's going to be real important to stay up to date on this. I'm going to pull up the Q&A box here and take a look at this. All right. If I'm representing a buyer, wouldn't I put my compensation in the contract to purchase? I've already answered that one. In New York, I'm working without being in MLS and NAR. In the Hamptons, Florida seems must to join the MLS and NAR. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Got another question about how about using a buyer's credit? You can do that. You can have an agreement with the buyer, and that's a good question, because that's going to be outlined in your buyer brokerage agreement. One of the things that is super important to know is that the buyer brokerage agreement you're going to be able to outline your compensation in that. And as this all unfolds, and again, I'm being very careful on what, and I'm not an attorney, I'm not giving legal advice. I am just reiterating what has been handed down by the National Association of Realtors and the Florida Realtors. So by no means is this stuff set in stone. Let's just be real clear on that. But this is a service that we wanted to provide, because there's a lot of stuff out there that's being thrown around that is not super accurate. So in your buyer brokerage agreement, you are going to be able, and that's always been the case, that you could put a compensation from the buyer. And over the years, I've worked with buyers where I actually charge them a retainer fee up front. And so it just depends on what your agreement with your buyer actually is. So there's a lot of ways to be compensated. And I think some of this is probably going to create a lot of ingenuity and stuff, as long as we're not violating laws or ethics or any rule or anything like that. But it's a wide variety of ways that you can be compensated. And if you think about other professions, the other professions are compensated that way too. You can charge a buyer an hourly rate. There's no rule or law that says that you can't charge a buyer a retainer. And so as long as you have an active real estate license, you can do that stuff. So remember to check with your broker as well. And if you're the broker, these are policy changes that you're really going to want to get on top of. And you've got July is when most of this stuff is gonna take place. So here we go. What about P&S agreement, purchase sale agreement made on June 15th that will close on September 15th? Okay, we got questions about timeframes. If a purchase sale agreement is executed on June 15th, set to close on September 15th. Well, hopefully before the purchase sale agreement was executed, you would have your agreement for compensation with either the seller's broker, or as the buyer's agent or buyer's broker between you and the buyer. Okay, so in essence, with that, realistically, you're going to want to have, no matter when that happens. But that's a great question. I would start practicing this now and making sure that it's outlined. Okay, I'm going to get 5% or 2% from, or whatever, from either the buyer or $10,000 or $15,000, whatever the case would be. I'm going to get that from the buyer or the seller, and how is that going to happen? I would have that done before the actual execution of a purchase and sale agreement myself. Can it be put under comments and showing time? No. Good question. I've got a question here from Michelle. Can it be put under the comments and the showing time? And from what I've been told is that it cannot, because it ties to the MLS. So and again, I would make sure you clarify that too with whichever MLS system you're using, showing time buttons and all that stuff. But from what I've been told is that you cannot put it in showing time. So there's going to be some weird changes and stuff. All right. In summary, huge settlement simply to eliminate publishing cooperating compensation on the MLS. Yes, pretty much. That's really it. And I think the big fear and the big elephant in the room, if you will, is that we've been doing things a certain way for 100 years. And now we have to do them a little bit differently. And folks, I was an appraiser for a number of years, and I remember in the 80s when, with the savings and loan mess and how regulation came about with that, and it changed everything. So there are certain changes that happen in the real estate industry, no matter what it is, lending and all of that can be a big problem. So that being said, too, there's been a lot of questions, and I encourage you, and I don't have the link on here. I'll try to get it. Maybe if we can do a share or do this again, that there's lending questions too. There's been a lot of finance questions, and some of this stuff is, again, we don't know. I do know that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are diligently looking at changing some things to figure out how to, if there's concessions offered. I know the VA is looking at stuff as well. So those changes are going to come about. Nobody really knows what the parameters are going to be. With how much is there a percentage or what that the seller can contribute in concessions that the buyer can then pay the buyer's agent, and how is it going to affect lending? Really, nobody is quite sure yet. So I hate to speculate. I don't want to speculate or make any kind of suggestions that could be wrong. So that's going to be a wait and see type of thing. But I'm pretty sure that they're going to have to make some changes to how things are financed. Been some really good questions in here. How does this impact buyer referral compensation? That's a good question. And I've got a question here about referrals. As far as I think with that, if you have a referral agreement with another brokerage, then it's not in the MLS. So there should not be any kind of impact at all on referral work, because that's done off of a separate referral contract. Did you say we're going to discuss rentals? At this point, um, good question. Rentals. Any rentals, the compensation actually cannot, from what we have been told, cannot be in the MLS. So again, that's going to be something that has to be figured out as things go forward. Is the buyer broker agreement needed to show rentals? And they are still addressing that. And I believe if you're a realtor, that they do want you to use a buyer brokerage agreement. But I look for that form to change. I'd like to. I have a feeling they're going to come out with some kind of rental tour agreement eventually too, for compensation as well. So all residential agents must be members of MLS and NAR. No, no, they don't. Uh, by the way, I'm not sure if you guys know about, in Florida, there's what's called the Thompson brokerage, which is a brokerage that you actually can join an MLS, but you're not a realtor member, and it's specific to just a few states. But anyway, if you ever get a chance to look up Thompson brokerage, and you can see that. Also, there are brokerages that are not members of the MLS, not members of the realtors, and not realtor members, and some of them do strictly property management. So there's a lot of other things, and that's something to consider, folks. There's a lot of other things in real estate that you can do with a license. And here at Gold Coast, we encourage that. We have, in the state of Florida, we've got timeshare. I've a lot of former students that have gone on to very successful careers with timeshare, property management, business brokerage, commercial brokerage, and agricultural and other stuff that are not realtors. And so there's a lot of opportunity with a real estate license. So just food for thought. And at Gold Coast, that's what we do. We really try to keep a broad scope of the education side of it. And so that's, again, the laws are one thing. Being a realtor and a MLS participant is another sometimes. Okay, so you do have to be a licensee to be a realtor, but you do not have to be a realtor to be an active licensee. Okay, so keep that in mind. And honestly, I look for some of that to change as far as the numbers of people that participate as realtors and MLS participants, depending on what kind of real estate transactions they do. So there's a lot of variety out there. And here at Gold Coast, again, we're here to help you with career decisions and whatever we can help you with as far as getting involved in other pieces of real estate. And let's see. When running search, seeing example sellers agent collecting 4%, buyer 1%. Since we won't be able to see this disparity, do we need to call or email each listing agent? That's a good question. And there is examples, and here's the thing to remember: any agreement between a listing agent and a seller, that's their agreement. If you're representing a buyer and there's a compensation offered out, and it's, I don't know, the question here was 1%, and that's not enough. Well, in your buyer brokerage agreement, you want to put that the buyer may be responsible for up to 3% or 4% or whatever, 10%, whatever you can get from the buyer, and not worry about how much the seller is offering out. So again, folks, this is going to come down to negotiation and being good at being able to negotiate as this all unfolds. All right. Can we get a class video? Listen again. And I believe we are going to be able to present this down the road. I think we're going to try to get this on the website and explain some of the ramifications to buyers, listing agents not offering compensation. And again, that's kind of what I just went over. If they don't offer compensation, you may have to get it from the buyer. And the other part to that is too, that can be part of the negotiation. That can be part of the negotiation as well. It's going to change a lot of things. All right, can request a buyer broker compensation be included with this offer and additional terms. Don't know one buyer who wants to pay a fee. Been doing this for 11 years. Well, and that's a good point. One of the comments in the box is, don't know one buyer that has wanted to pay the buyer's fee uh, and been doing it for 11 years. And that's where things are going to change. And that's a lot of the anxiety and stuff that this is causing, is we're going to have to start learning how to. And again, the finance part of this is really going to play a part. I had another question in here about a retainer from a seller. Yes, you can. If that's in your, you can have a listing agreement and collect money from the seller. If you can negotiate that, good. I've done that myself because I've told sellers, straight up, it's going to cost me money to do this, to get this listing going, and I've actually collected a retainer fee up front. All right, I've got one here. Thinking of getting a Florida license. Will the education classes be updated before July? Good question. How about our pre-license classes? Well, here's the truth about that. The law is not changing. And in class, what we teach is real estate law. So it's not going to change the syllabus so much for the state of Florida. So that's a really good question, because people have been asking that. There's students that ask the same question. Well, is this going to change? And in pre-license, so we teach pre-license, the laws and the rule will not change. And so at this point, nothing that we know of. And so for what we teach in pre-license, is you have to go pass a state test. You have to pass our test and go pass a state test. And there's nothing that has anything really to do with being a realtor or an MLS participant on the state testing. So that goes back to the whole, there's other things to do with a real estate license in Florida that do not require that you are a realtor. And so I think that's one of the big things. And a lot of times I think there's a lot of confusion that everybody with a real estate license is a realtor, and that's not the case. So good question, but the syllabus and what we teach in pre-license should not be changing. Why does it matter if the listing side is not paying a buyer's agent side cannot earn more than what is stipulated on the buyer brokerage agreement anyway? Yeah, good point. Can you give a credit or, I didn't understand that one. Let's see. I got a couple more minutes here. All right. What if a buyer refuses to sign a buyer brokerage agreement and you've been working with them for the last year? That is a good question, and I'm gonna stop on that one. And I've had other people that have been asking me that if somebody is working, I've got agents that have been asking the same thing. Hey, Bill, working with this buyer, and I'm trying to get them to sign a buyer brokerage agreement, but we've been working together for 6 months already. And the truth is that if you are able to show them the changes, explain why, and build your value. And I'm going to close with this. If you're building your value as a real estate licensee, it makes asking for this stuff a lot easier. Even in the listing appointment, when I go over listing appointments and agreements with people, I tell agents constantly, if you build the value in your service, then asking for money should not be that difficult. A lot of it comes down to confidence. And the more confident you are, the better you are at asking for money. So with that, you've got the best way to get confident is to learn as much as you can about your trade. And at Gold Coast, we are here to help you advance your career. Hopefully you're working with a brokerage, if you're working as a sales associate or broker associate, where your broker is really encouraging you to continue learning constantly. There's a saying that I really like. It's learn more, earn more. And with that, that's usually a pretty consistent thing with real estate. The more you know, the more confidence you're going to have, the easier it's going to be. So that is why we really wanted to put this together for you today. So we want you to be confident going out there. We do want you to know that these changes are inevitable. There's stuff that's changing, and we can adapt to it. This industry's been around a long time, and we will survive. So I'm going to go ahead and shut the camera down and look at some of the questions, and we will. We're going to try to make this shareable somehow, probably maybe off of our website. And so we do thank you guys for being here. Thank you. You're quite welcome. And so I appreciate all the great questions, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. So thank you again for attending, and thank you for choosing Gold Coast for your educational needs. Have a great weekend.